Join you all on International Peace Day and to welcome you to this webinar on moving the money from the military to meet human needs. I'm Miriam Pemberton and I will be moderating. So I wonder how many of you saw any reference to the new social progress index this month. This compares all the countries in the world on a variety of indicators, which are a pretty good proxy for human needs, I'd say. So there's an education indicator, a healthcare, income security, you know, all the human needs. So the headline is that Norway is #1, not surprising. And the United States of America, the richest country on earth, is number 28. So it has the best universities in the world, but it ranks 91st, I believe, in providing a good quality basic education to its citizens. Likewise, it's #1 in medical technology, but 97th in providing access to good quality healthcare for its citizens. Of course, the United States is #1 in a couple of ways. It is the country whose more of its indicators are falling than any other country. And of course, it is also by far the world's leading military spender and weapons exporter. So this webinar is about organizing to change that. And specifically, it's focused on what can be done in the remaining weeks to make this into a campaign issue, or I'd add into a post-election organizing platform. So what issues make up a demilitarization agenda? I thought Code Pink came up with a nice list, and I'm sure you can see it on their website, but I just thought I'd read through their 10 peace positions for presidential candidates. #1, reduce military spending and invest at home. #2, end wars, eliminate sanctions, use diplomacy. #3, work for a nuclear-free world. #4, end weapons sales to human rights violators. #5, close overseas military bases. #6, cease Cold War provocations toward China. #7, end support for Israel's war on the Palestinians. #8, promote women in peacemaking. #9, stop the militarization of the border and of police. And #10, no campaign donations from weapons companies. So the Connecticut Peace and Solidarity Coalition is part of a new national coalition that's being formed. They call for organizing local public hearings, local city council resolutions, and referenda on behalf of moving the money. So the website is moneyforhumanneeds.org, and you should check it out. So the way this is going to work is I've been asked to provide a little context based on my expertise or my passion, really, which is economic conversion, converting swords into plowshares, or military resources to civilian use. Then I will introduce our two principal speakers, and after they talk, they'll take a few of your questions. So as you're listening, please send the questions you'd like them to answer in the chat box at the bottom there. So on a word or two on converting swords into plowshares. Moving the money is simply the key to making this happen. If the lion's share of our federal budget is going to the military, the contractors are going to fight tooth and nail to keep it there. And the communities and the workers that are dependent on military spending will all too often be right behind them. The contractors will be using all their power and all their usual methods, that is political contributions, dangling lucrative future jobs in front of the people at the Pentagon who are supposed to be keeping tabs on them and keeping them honest, and also spreading contracts in as many congressional districts as they possibly can to create political power. If, on the other hand, the money moves and there is substantial reinvestment in other priorities, this obstacle shrinks because it changes the incentives that at the moment favor military contracting. So as we talk about human needs, the human need that I think is most applicable to conversion is preventing climate catastrophe and the pandemics that will grow as it grows. A big piece of this challenge, as we all know, is to invest in building a clean energy and transportation economy. And that's the place I think the contractors could be most productively involved. They won't, again, unless there's a lot of money invested in those priorities. But the country has gotten a real education this year into how our true national security threats have really not much at all to do with military forces and everything to do with climate change and global pandemics. So this is the moment to take that new awakening and turn it into political change. So to our two speakers, first will be Dr. Vijay Prashad, who's a historian and journalist. He's the author of 30 books, that's unbelievable, including Washington Bullets, Red Star Over the Third World, The Darker Nations, A People's History of the Third World and the Poorer Nations, A Possible History of the Global South. He's chief correspondent for Globetrotter and a columnist for Frontline in India. He's the chief editor of LeftWord Books in New Delhi. He's appeared in 2 films, Shadow World, 2016, and 2 Meetings in 2017. So take it away, Vijay, and please put your questions in the chat, and I will give them to him when he finishes. Vijay.
Okay. First, it's very great to be here. This is, as Miriam said, the International Day of Peace, set up by a United Nations General Assembly resolution in 1981. I wanted to say that because the United Nations General Assembly is given short shrift in the world. It's, after all, the General Assembly that is the body of nations, of all countries in the world, and not the UN Security Council, which, as you know, is dominated by the veto power members and has, over its history, felt more than anything the very warm, breath of the United States and its pressure on its partner countries, France, the United Kingdom, and so on, to have a lockhold on the Security Council. The General Assembly, of course, is quite different. You see every year the General Assembly in large majorities votes to end the embargo blockade on Cuba. Every year, 180 countries out of 193. And you know, the United States with 1 or 2 countries. Last time, quite shamefully, Brazil joining the United States, holding fast with Israel. And then the General Assembly will vote in large numbers, again, to end the occupation of the Palestinians. The United States will stand alone, 1 or 2 countries, Israel, of course, and a few others, perhaps Palau and so on from the Southern Pacific. A few other countries will join the US, but that's it. On so many crucial issues, including militarism, the world stands apart from the United States. Recently, Peter Hare, a former British ambassador to Cuba, said that the United States, he told Reuters, the United States is totally isolated, he said, on Cuba, on the policy on Cuba. And yet, it's the US government that is fabricating nonsense, helped along, I must say, shamefully by Human Rights Watch, that so-called independent human rights organization based in New York City. Human Rights Watch also recently brought out a quite disgraceful report on Venezuela. These are reports with very little factual basis. But come back to Cuba for a minute. Human Rights Watch producing a report attacking Cuban doctors for going abroad to help people during the pandemic in 55 countries. I recently spent time talking to doctors who are posted in Belize, in Barbados, in Jamaica, and we're going to do an event on Saturday together. Very interesting people, certainly not forced into this. United States putting pressure on Cuba, putting pressure on Venezuela, and I'm going to come to this in a minute, putting pressure on China. Meanwhile, the bulk of the world's people, not to speak of their governments who vote in the General Assembly, are enamored by the Cuban doctors, the so-called army in white coats. Because we see, as all of us, I think, on this webinar see, we see the Cuban doctors as exactly the antidote to a militarized society. After all, when Fidel Castro mooted the idea of creating the Henry Reeve Brigade, the brigade named after an American soldier who went to fight on behalf of Cuba for its independence, Henry Reeve. When they created the Henry Reeve Brigade, the context was Hurricane Katrina. The United States had suffered this calamity. The Cubans said, we'd like to send doctors. George W. Bush said nothing doing. And so then Castro and the Cuban leadership created the Henry Reeve Brigade in 2005, 15 years ago, with the purpose of going abroad as they had been going since 1960, the earthquake in Chile. And at that time, Castro famously said, we don't need to build bombers. We don't need to build aircraft that can bomb places. We send our doctors. Friends, this is a contrast. The contrast between this small island, Cuba, which exports doctors, and the United States, which exports arms. Not the least of which to countries like Saudi Arabia, which are conducting a murderous war against Yemen. 28 million people in Yemen, looks like 20 million of them are near starvation as we speak now. It is a scandal that the United States is continuing to arm Saudi Arabia, despite what the General Secretary of the UN, Antonio Guterres, said, who said, during this pandemic, let us have a ceasefire. No. Canada, the United States, all of them continuing to arm the Saudis, and that war continuing. There is a stark contrast in the world. I don't want to speak in generalities. The whole world is militarized. No. Cuba is not taken the path of this kind of militarization. And I think that's important. It is important, I think, for people in the United States to sharply recognize that it's the United States government that has 800 and some bases in 180 countries around the world. The Russians have 10 military bases. 8 of them are in countries that were in the former USSR. The Chinese have basically 1, maybe 2, if you count this other one they're building, 2 military bases outside territorial China. The comparisons are incredible. I mean, we're talking about one country that has a military force capable of destroying anywhere in the world. And we have these other countries, Vietnam, for instance, Laos, which put their precious, poor resources into healthcare, into education, into taking care of their population. And guess what, friends? It shows. Here's the pandemic. It's countries like China, which contained the pandemic once they realized what it was. We have Vietnam. We have Laos, country of 7 million people, borders China, not one death. It's incredible what they've been able to do in that very poor, extraordinarily poor country. Cuba, even Venezuela, despite the murderous sanctions, been able to, with great difficulty, hold the pandemic down. The United States, Brazil, India, these wretched countries with wretched governments. India, the world's largest importer of weapons. It's a scandal. Half the population can't eat and it imports weapons. Half of the world's, it's the largest importer of weapons. It imports half the weapons that Israel exports. That's India. Mark you. Brazil, another arms importer and exporter. Don't know what they are importing weapons for. I don't know what the United States has so many weapons and bases for. Is it just because they are habituated to having this, or is it something else? And I'm going to be brief. I'm not going to take long. I forgot to ask Miriam how long I get, but I'll just take about 5-6 minutes more. Why does the United States have such an enormous military arsenal? There are many explanations within the political economy of the United States, and I can share it very quickly. One of the explanations is the US government conducts counter-cyclical spending. When there's a normal business cycle downturn, you need government investment to push up the downturn of the economy. And in many countries, that counter-cyclical spending comes in the social side. You spend on health, education, you do infrastructural investment and so on. To the US ruling class, all that smells like socialism. So rather than do that, you do your counter-cyclical spending by military spending. And that's what we call military Keynesianism. It's rooted in the political economy of the United States to conduct its Keynesianism through military spending. That's one explanation. There's another explanation, particularly now when you see the use of military power against China. There's another explanation. I mean, the United States has basically in the last 45 years hollowed out manufacturing inside the country, has participated in building a new structure, global structure, this globalized supply chain, broken up factories, distributed them all over the world. And the main comparative advantage of the United States in all this was no longer manufacturing. It was high tech. It was basically patents and holding patents in the higher end of the value chain. Until 2 or 3 years ago, the United States was ahead of everybody in patent applications and ahead of everybody in scientific papers. In the last 2 years, Chinese scientists have more scientific papers than scientists based in the United States. And from last year onwards, the World Intellectual Property Organization reported that Chinese applications for patents outstripped that from the United States. Now, these are not just any patents. These are quite sophisticated patents. And what the United States has come to recognize is as a consequence of the Clinton era fragmentation, the deregulation of telecommunications, that bill from 1996, as a consequence of that, American telecommunications companies have just not invested in developing the next and the further generations of telecom. This is one of the tragedies of neoliberal capitalism, tragedy for humanity, not for the rich. They've been able to take their profits and sit on them in tax havens or buying islands or playing around doing whatever they want. They haven't pulled this back into investment. Investments are way down inside the United States, and investments in telecommunications collapsed, which is why ZTE and Huawei and other Chinese firms are way ahead, a generation ahead of US telecommunications, a generation ahead of Nokia, for instance, which has also made a bid for 5G. So the Chinese have made it clear that they are a next generation of telecom. They are in the next generation of robotics. They have a GPS system which is far better than anything available in the United States. This is just purely in terms of their science and tech development, and then in terms of what they are able to commercially put into place. Rather than, or because the United States, Silicon Valley cannot compete one-on-one with Chinese firms, because commerce is just not possible, they are using the military. They are using essentially what I think is a clearer word, imperialism, to gain an advantage over China's leapfrogging over Western superiority on these kinds of things. And what you're seeing is this attack on Huawei globally is an attempt to push Huawei back into the Chinese borders. The attack on TikTok, the attack on Tencent, the attack on WeChat and so on is to push them back into the borders, border of China, to say, well, you can operate in China, not anywhere else in the world, because in the rest of the world, this third-rate technology from the United States is going to be shoved down the throats of the people of the planet. In India, for instance, where the government has decided to push away Chinese technology, I think to the loss of the Indian people. So this is what's occurring in the South China Sea. Is the United States using military force to bring democracy to China? Not on your life. That's not even on the cards. Is the United States there to defend Hong Kong or Taiwan? Not really. If it were any other place, they'd cut a deal and let Taiwan be taken over. That's not the issue. Are they there to defend Muslims? I mean, have you lost your mind that the United States government is the new defender of Muslims? This is the government that created Guantanamo and bombed Afghanistan and has been at war with these countries with large Muslim populations for years. That's hardly the motivation. Mike Pence, the global champions of Muslims, come off it. That's hardly going to stand. It's not credible at all. They are there to put pressure on China essentially because they cannot compete with China economically, particularly in high tech and science, which means many generations. Are they there, by the way, to protect the privacy of the American and the global consumer, because they are afraid that Huawei is going to turn over your data to the Chinese government. There's no evidence that Huawei has ever done that. But meanwhile, thanks to Edward Snowden, we have evidence that the United States, we have concrete evidence, United States Silicon Valley firms do put their information of yours directly into the National Security Agency and so on. We know that there is this delivery of data to government agencies. We know that's already happening. So now they are saying, be careful, the Chinese will do it. I mean, it's extraordinary that any of their their kind of complaints, allegations against China hold water. What it's really about, and just to repeat, and I'll wrap up here, what it's really about is this attack on the fact that the Chinese have been able to go beyond the United States in high tech, and they want to put them back into their borders. They want to put the genie back in the bottle. I'm afraid it's not going to happen. And that's why it's quite a dangerous situation. There was a Harvard University study recently which showed that the Chinese population has a high regard for the Communist Party. It also showed, I think, something that the agents of color revolution will probably be disappointed by, but it showed that the population simply doesn't want to see what happened to the USSR. When it collapsed, there was chaos and standards of living collapsed. And so they don't want a repeat of that. There's no appetite for regime change inside China, which leaves the United States with very few weapons in its quiver. And I mean that exactly, that an armed conflict is perhaps the only thing that the US government has, whether it's Trump or maybe Biden or whoever. They're going to push the same kind of policy, and it's a very dangerous policy. This is the International Day of Peace. We've come here to pledge ourselves to peace. We want military budgets to be used like the Cubans have done, for good, not for ill. We salute the Cuban doctors and say, I hope they win the Nobel Prize this year. It would be a huge boost to humanity. We want that kind of world. We don't want to live in a world where you have aircraft carriers, swimming along in the South China Sea, creating dangerous situation, not for the ordinary citizenry, but for the Silicon Valley elite class. It's a dangerous time, friends, and I very much hope that you're all seized of the urgency of this. Yes, let's convert the military into peaceful means, but first let's stop them from taking the world to another catastrophic war. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Vijay. There's some interesting questions here. One is, are leaders such as those in Kerala able to buck the national state in India to gain advantages of Chinese technology?
See, Kerala is just a state inside the Indian Union, and just as in other federated countries, there are some matters left to states, some matters left to the central government, and some matters in a joint list which center and state has to negotiate. Increasingly, the right-wing government in Delhi has been encroaching on state subjects. They've been dismissing federalism for centralism. So this is a big problem in India. Recently, there was an agrarian bill passed, 3 of them yesterday, created huge hue and cry. This is the central government entering into the state government's domain. So this attack on federalism is a big thing. Unfortunately, state governments don't have either financial authority or authority to make trade arrangements of their own. If there is a central government diktat to close down trade with China, the state can't buck the system. And the left in India is, even though the left is millions, hundreds of millions of people, it's extraordinarily weak in comparison, and just cannot move an agenda against the jingoism. The drums against China are very loud, Miriam. It's a dangerous thing. India and China have already clashed up in the Galwan Valley, and several dozen troops were killed in hand-to-hand combat because they don't arm the front line. You've got to understand that up there, 10, 15,000, 18, 19,000 feet above sea level, there are soldiers sitting in posts looking at each other across the tundra. That itself is a human rights violation. If we had a proper system, Miriam, I would like to take a case to the International Criminal Court charging all these governments with endangerment of humanity by Pakistan, India, China, putting troops up there, the high plateau of Tibet. That should just be illegal. I mean, there are the more people who die of frostbite up there than die from any engagement with each other.
Here's another question. How can we build stronger coalitions so that various groups see the dangers of rampant militarism as Martin Luther King did? And then this person believes we ought to be in the streets. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the thing I would say, I mean, this is a very important issue, but I mean, I remember when the big women's march took place in Washington, D.C. At the time, I asked one of the leaders why the anti-war content of the speakers was so low. You know, it was a lot of domestic issues, but there was really no anti-war content in that march, which was a very impressive, superb march. But I just asked, I said, you know, why was there so little about militarism and so on? And the answer I got was very interesting. She said that, well, the anti-war movement in the United States is very weak. And so I thought, well, but you are strong and you believe in anti-war issues. So shouldn't you bring a weak movement in and give visibility, right? You know, I think there's just very little sense of this is what's happening to movements around the world. There is a kind of NGOization of political movements. You do war, I do reproductive rights, I do this, I do that. And this fracturing of the pie, as it were, of the left has meant that a coordinated understanding that we are all fighting a totality, it's not so clear to people. So it's as if you are an anti-war person and somebody else is reproductive rights, but there is no difference between the two. We have to learn to articulate our thinking about these, you know, put them into one framework and not see the anti-war movement as somehow outside the poor people's campaign, you know, the campaign for Black Lives. I mean, these are all movements fighting for the same thing, which is a humane world. So I feel like we have to get out of this NGO mentality and get back to the mentality where we are basically fighting to create a humane socialist world. And there's no need to be apologetic about it. You know, you want to create a decent world. People can eat, children can play on the street, everybody can have some modicum of happiness. There'll still be lunatics in our society. That's okay. We'll deal with them. You know, there will be people with far right ideas. We can deal with them. We'll engage them, whatever. But the point is that they should not be dominating us. And if they are not going to dominate us, in order for that to happen, we need to combine, and our thinking needs to change.
You mentioned, I'll just step in here, you mentioned the Poor People's Campaign, and the Institute for Policy Studies, where I've worked, does a lot of work with them. And I think they've done a good job of, you know, focusing on all three pillars that Martin Luther King identified as being connected, that is racism, poverty, and militarism. So I feel like there's some progress on that front at least. Finally, I guess, are any federal legislators now working on legislation that would mandate a phased transfer of military spending to human needs? If so, who are they, and what does that proposed legislation look like?
No, I can't answer that. I don't know the answer to that, but I'll just say something parenthetical to that, related, and then I'll leave it at that. You know, every year in the United Nations General Assembly, you know, countries that are less powerful, let's put it like that, including small island states and so on, put things on the table. You know, no stealth nuclear testing, nuclear-free zones. You know, every region has people coming there and saying we need a nuclear-free zone. You know, the comprehensive bans, this intermediate ban that the United States withdrew from. It's very alarming for people around the world. Today is Nkrumah's birthday, Kwame Nkrumah, the great leader of Ghana. It's his birthday today. In his book, Imperialism, you know, Neocolonialism, the last stage of imperialism, published in, I don't know, 1970 something, he writes about the idea of limited wars. He says that, you know, when the major powers have nuclear weapons, they face each other off and they don't want to start a nuclear war necessarily. So they start these limited wars. And he gives the example of Vietnam in his book. And he says, you know, it starts as a so-called limited war, but no war is limited. You know, you start between South and North Vietnam, then you will go to Laos, then you will go and bomb Cambodia, then you'll destabilize Thailand because you start using it as your, launching pad and so on. You remember Central America. Was there a limited war? I mean, just see what the dirty wars did. Was Guatemala a limited war? No, because then it's not Guatemala, it's El Salvador, and then it's how to destabilize Nicaragua, and then you've already destabilized Honduras, and then you create a fellow in Panama, Manuel Noriega, who you then have to go and overthrow. I mean, was there a limited war in Central America? I don't think so. Every country was swept into that disgusting 1980s Reagan era wars. So, I mean, people are trying desperately from around the world to put on the table, all these kind of treaties, begging people. And inside the United States, I know that there's networks, on intermediate missiles. I know people in their own, the peace communities are fighting and so on, but there is no mass awakening on these issues. There is somehow still a belief that the US government is benevolent and it's only there to secure the safety of the American citizens. I mean, how do you break that barrier? Let's be frank about it. That's the problem. There are peace movements, Hiroshima Day everywhere, but these are not mass activities. These are activities of a narrow current of the peace movement. The bulk of the population still has faith that this god-awful structure is there to protect them. And that is something that we need to figure out a way to unlock the consciousness here and, show in practical activity that, they are not there for you. As Rosa Luxemburg wrote, workers of the world unite in peacetime. In war, they slit each other's throats.
With respect to federal legislation, I'll just say Bernie Sanders has been about proposing bills to move the money to human needs, his entire career. And he just recently put forward a new proposal along that line. It didn't get very far, but he will, if the Democrats take the Senate, he will be the head of the Budget Committee. And so I think there will be an opening there and there'll be a lot more discussion, Lord help us, than otherwise. Okay, so we should move on to our second speaker. This is Dr. Gerald Horne, who holds the Morris Professorship of History and African American Studies at the University of Houston. Horne is the author of more than 30 books, just like Vijay, it's amazing, including The Apocalypse of Settler Colonialism, The Roots of Slavery, White Supremacy, and Capitalism in 17th Century North America and the Caribbean, Paul Robeson, The Artist as Revolutionary, and W.E.B. Du Bois, a biography. So please, we look forward to hearing from Dr. Horne. Take it away.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and it's a pleasure to be here. My remarks will be multi-part. That is to say, at first I'll sketch the domestic scene, secondly, the global scene, third, how we have reached the brink of catastrophe on both the domestic and global levels, and finally, where do we go from here? Now, we're in the middle of a pandemic in which 200,000 people in the United States alone have died. It's had a disproportionate impact on people of color generally and Black people particularly, to the point where some are referring to it as COVID-16-19, a reference to the fact that this disproportionate impact is a legacy of slavery. The pandemic is leading to a famine crisis in Africa, not to mention growing hunger in the United States itself. The pandemic is wounding entire sectors of the economy, leading to massive layoffs in state, county, and municipal budgets, airlines, restaurants, mass transit, libraries and museums, oil, car rentals, hotels, bookstores, Hollywood, and the entire entertainment industrial complex. Unemployment is skyrocketing, along with claims for unemployment compensation. The crisis is also exacerbating pre-existing tensions, leading to confrontations in the streets. This will worsen if Republicans move prematurely and speedily to nominate a hardline jurist to replace the late Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I hope all have paid careful attention to the recent remarks by Trump fixer, the recently pardoned Roger Stone, who suggested that if the Oval Office was losing on election day, he should confiscate the ballot boxes, he should declare martial law, and should nationalize the National Guard. Michael Caputo, the recently resigned Trump regime official, suggested that Trumpistas should start hoarding and storing bullets for reasons that were unclear. Attorney General Barr has suggested that the mayor of Seattle should be indicted for not cracking down more readily and heavily on Black Lives Matter protesters. He's also floated the idea of indictments of Black Lives Matter activists on grounds of conspiracy and sedition. At the same time, there's a growing armed militia movement, such as the Patriot Prayer movement, that is patrolling the streets of Portland, the Boogaloo Boys, the Proud Boys, QAnon, a neo-fascist group that will be sending members to Congress in a few months, it appears. There's a scent of fascism in the air, as foreshadowed by former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright in her recent book on that subject. There's a serious discussion in hardline GOP circles as to whether Mr. Trump will actually leave office, if not victorious. In the Financial Times of London, columnist Edward Luce says that we shouldn't look for a split in the military if that takes place, but look to the Secret Service or the Capitol Police. I would also add, as we have to pay careful attention to those who carry the guns, to look what happens with the DC Metropolitan Police Department. Globally, the United States is heightening tensions with China with billion-dollar arms sales to Taiwan. The so-called Abraham Accord is no more than an arms deal to the United Arab Emirates, to then be speedily exceeded by a deal with Israel. There are tensions with Iran as the United States moves to both pull out of the anti-nuclear agreement and enforce its sanctions, which was the subject of a press conference this morning in Washington that not only included the Secretary of State, but the Secretary of Commerce, the Pentagon chief et al. There are tensions with Russia, as Senator Cruz, on behalf of Texas energy interests, is pressing Germany to break a natural gas deal with Moscow. He doesn't mention the second part of the agenda, which is that Louisiana and Texas energy interests could then replace Russian energy interests. President Macron of France says that NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, inaugurated in 1949, supposedly to confront Moscow, is brain dead, but the United States still continues to press Germany to buy more arms. Now, there hangs a tale, for not only are our domestic needs being wrecked and wounded by Pentagon spending, which is approaching $1 trillion annually, the merchants of death, including, and Exhibit A would be former Raytheon executive Mark Esper, now head of the Pentagon. The merchants of death are also dominating US foreign policy, which brings us to the question, how did we reach the brink of disaster? Well, I think you need look no further than the previous historical epic, speaking of the Cold War. Not only did it point the United States towards what late President Eisenhower called a so-called military-industrial complex, it also led to the fateful early 1970s decision of Washington to broker an entente with China to encircle the Soviet Union, leading to billions, if not trillions, in foreign direct investment into China, creating a juggernaut that the United States is now seeking to destabilize by dint of arms deals to Taiwan and building up simultaneously Australia, India, and Japan in some sort of quad military alliance, as it's called in Washington. Moreover, the Cold War and its complement, the Red Scare, also mandated a weakening of perceived domestic allies of Moscow, such as left labor, speaking of the International Labor and International Longshore and Warehousemen's Union in the first instance, led for decades by Harry Bridges, there was an attempt decades long to deport him on anti-communist grounds. And then the Union was fundamentally ousted from the House of Labor. And justifiably, I think it's fair to say that labor has hardly recovered from that self-inflicted wound. And then that was accompanied by the deportation of Jamaica-born communist Ferdinand Smith of the National Maritime Union by 1950, which has converted that once powerful union into a shell of its former self that basically works on what are routinely referred to as vessels that are no more than floating slums. A similar persecution befell the left generally, with Paul Robeson, the tallest tree in our forest, being the exemplar. And when this socialist was persecuted, a signal was sent that Black folk in particular, who are the most staunch opponents of the right wing, should stay away from foreign policy. An edict followed generally since that time, with honorable exceptions such as Martin Luther King Jr. and Congresswoman Barbara Lee of Oakland, Berkeley, who of course floated a resolution just months ago that received about 100 votes calling for a 10% cut in the Pentagon's budget, with talk of that money then being applied to fight the pandemic. Likewise, with notable exceptions, labor too was coerced into either avoiding foreign policy or worse, going along with it. This in turn weakened labor education, making a sector of the US working class more susceptible to opportunistic infections, leading some to join the 63 million strong base that placed the Manhattan Mussolini, the Tangerine Man, the Agent Orange, the Oath in the Oval Office in office by January 2017. Given this state of affairs, what is to be done? Well, obviously, we're here to talk about moving the money from arms spending to human needs, healthcare to confront the pandemic, food stamps to confront hunger, education to confront ignorance, construction of public housing to confront homelessness. But this presupposes a mass movement, which I would like to think is foreshadowed by the recently announced alliance between the NAACP and the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, who are joining hands to register voters. But let us hope that they can be urged and prodded to take the next step and cry out, move the money. So what do we say when the White House says, cut billions of dollars in aid to Medicaid and increase Pentagon spending? We say, move the money. What do we say when the White House says, cut billions in aid to students and increase Pentagon spending? We say the reverse, move the money from the Pentagon to the students. More than this, we should urge that every labor local should set up a move the money caucus in their union, in their block association, in their tenants group. They should also be demanding meetings with their congresspersons, because I am sure, irrespective of the results of the November 3rd election, that there will be an energized attempt in 2021 to once again seek to cut the Pentagon budget. We should also be urging our allies to draft resolutions on moving the money and introducing same in the city council. Let me end with two cautionary notes. First of all, we should not think that even if the Oath in the Oval Office is defeated on November 3rd, that all our problems will be automatically solved. In order to think that, you would have to ignore the discredited hawks now surrounding Mr. Biden, including Colin Powell, Michelle Flournoy, who is slated to take over the Pentagon, and others with fingerprints on previously failed foreign policies. On a more positive note, pay careful and close attention to the front page article in the September 17th, 2020 New York Times, where the entire Washington foreign policy elite is lawyering up, as they like to say in Washington, in light of an international criminal court investigation into US war crimes in Yemen as a result of supplying military materiel to the so-called Saudi ally. This came this article appeared a few days after a similar article talking about Secretary of State Michael Pompeo seeking to impose sanctions on the International Criminal Court because of an investigation into US war crimes in Afghanistan, of which there are legions. Simultaneously, already there is at least faint discussion in certain countries where they subscribe to the idea of universal jurisdiction. That is to say, recall what happened to the late Chilean dictator Augusto Pinochet, where during a visit to London, he had to respond to a subpoena from a Spanish magistrate considering crimes that he had committed in Chile. In other words, the Spanish were seeking to have him extradited to stand trial in Spain, even though the purported offenses did not necessarily take place on Spanish soil. It seems to me that as US imperialism appears to be unbridled, unable to be restrained, there will be repeated efforts, I would think, to invoke universal jurisdiction to bring these war criminals that populate Washington to justice. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. The first question for you is, how do we get the Paul Robeson book?
At better bookstores everywhere. And although I should say that I usually direct people to 2 independent bookstores for any of my books, for that matter. Esalen in Los Angeles, which is doing booming business despite the pandemic. They have an online site. Esalen is ESO space WON. It's in Los Angeles. Or Sankofa Books in Washington, D.C., which also has many of my books, SANKOFA, right across the street from Howard University.
Great. Well, I guess I'd like to put to you the same question that Vijay had, which was, how can we build stronger coalitions so that various groups see the dangers of rampant militarism as Martin Luther King did?
Well, that's the $64 question, is it not? I would just reiterate some of the points that I made. Number one, we need to start talking about building peace caucuses, anti-war caucuses, move the money caucuses in our unions. We need to do the same thing with regard to our student associations and student groups, our tenant unions, etc. Certainly, like yourself, I'm heartened by some of the effort that's been exemplified by the Poor People's Campaign. And I think it also deserves our attention and our energy as well. And I would hope and imagine that in the run-up to any sort of attempt in 2021 to talk about moving the money from the Pentagon to human needs, there'd be an upswelling of support for yet another March on Washington, socially distanced, of course, in order to put pressure on Congress. And like any other March on Washington, it would involve delegations fanning out from the march to meet with their congressional delegations, particularly their senators.
Great. So here's a question questioning whether the military has actually been doing a not too shabby job of driving down its emissions. So should we be looking to the military to help with the climate catastrophe, I guess?
Well, I'm not so sure about that, but I will say this, that I haven't followed carefully what happened when the military sent one of its ships to New York a few months ago when the pandemic seemed to be at its height. They also sent a ship to Los Angeles. I perhaps, with an overly optimistic viewpoint, interpreted that as a kind of covert move the money campaign. That is to say, trying to take money from the Pentagon and direct it to healthcare, albeit under the guise of the Pentagon. I should also take this opportunity to embellish a couple of points that I made. One of the points that I think should have leaped out from my remarks is that increasingly US foreign policy is being shaped by arms deals. And secondly, I would say that US foreign policy is being shaped by the energy interests, particularly a right-wing Texas oil men. And therefore, focusing on those particular interests. I think of Harold Hamm, for example, who is one of Mr. Trump's closest comrades, who's based in Texas. I think of Raytheon, I think of Lockheed Martin, et cetera. That is to say, targeted campaigns against these charter members of the military industrial complex would also be quite useful.
Yeah. Just on the point of the military being useful to, the climate change crisis, a couple things. One, it's the largest institutional producer of greenhouse gases, the US military is. And, they are investing in some, they're trying to reduce their footprint, not because, they're trying to save the planet, but because, they can spend more money on weapons if they are not spending it on, these convoys to protect oil shipments through the desert. And, the problem is that the technology tends to be rather specific to the military. And, what needs to happen is if the military is investing in, clean technology, it needs to favor technologies that will actually be useful to the rest of us and to the non-military economy, which isn't happening so much. So you were mentioning weapons sales. Couple of factual questions. Wondering which countries besides Saudi Arabia buy weapons from the U.S. military manufacturers. And this is the same question. You can.
Well, I mean, the list is long. I mean, as I was trying to suggest, one of the controversies now is the United Arab Emirates supposedly in line to buy the F-35 jets, which of course has brought a smile to the face of many corporate executives in the United States of America. To reiterate, NATO, a brain-dead organization, according to President Macron of France, in some ways has become sort of an arms racket hustle because the arm of NATO members or those who aspire to become NATO members are twisted. And recall all of the rhetoric from Mr. Trump about the so-called dues, according to Mr. Trump, that NATO members are supposed to pay. What he's really talking about, they should write checks, preferably blank checks, to US arms manufacturers so that he will not unleash a Twitter storm against their leaders. Of course, with this development of this new Quad, Washington feels, Mr. Trump feels, that India could become a lush market for arms sales, even though there's a pre-existing decades-long relationship between Moscow and Delhi. But Washington feels that it can change that particular situation, particularly if Moscow is weakened sufficiently. So there are countries too numerous to mention who are lined up to buy military materiel from the United States. And once again, that's an essential part of US foreign policy. They're two sides of the same coin.
So last question, it seems that the climate movement is far bigger than the anti-war movement. I would agree with that. The Green New Deal is aimed at converting from fossil fuels to more sustainable energy production and use. Can the anti-war movement take examples from and join the climate movement to create a green peace New Deal?
Well, let's hope so. And I say that as I sit here in Southeast Texas with Hurricane Beta about to make landfall, who knows if we will survive. Already, I understand that the bad air from the fires of California has invaded the precincts of Washington, D.C., 3,000 miles to the east. Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, says that any debate over climate change should be over, but apparently that message has not been absorbed by the Manhattan Mussolini not to mention many of his comrades. And so it's apparent, and I think Vijay suggested this, that all of us, all of our organizations need to break out of their silos, so to speak. We need the peace movement to be a climate change movement. We need the climate change movement simultaneously to be a peace movement. We need the Black Lives Matter movement to be a move the money movement. We need the women's movement to be a move the money movement. So I think that that is the direction in which we should be headed.
Great, great. I was asked to sort of just mention a few key points that each of you made, and then you can tell me, the important stuff that I left out. So Vijay started out by talking about UN reform and the vast differences between the priorities of the General Assembly and the Security Council. Talking about the world standing apart from the US with respect to militarism. For example, the US's actions arming Saudi Arabia in the war in Yemen. He contrasted the exports of Cuba, mainly exporting doctors, and the US mainly exporting its weapons. He talked about military Keynesianism and the need for civilian investments. We're hyping the Chinese military threat, but really they are far ahead of us in fields like telecommunications, GPS, and so on. They are beating us there, and the US pretty much has its arms exports and its investment in its own military to try to stand up to China. And then, just adverting to the enormous dangers that are brewing in the South China Sea. Gerald outlined in terms of the domestic scene, the cascading effects of the pandemic, all of the very dangerous anti-democratic, autocratic moves that the Trump administration has been pursuing. He talked about a sense of fascism in the air. Globally, he outlined tensions with China, Iran, Russia, many of them involving energy interests, and the need to really focus on cutting Pentagon spending to fund human needs. He looked at the origins of where we are and the development of the military-industrial complex during the Cold War, and about the ways that during the Cold War, the Cold War was used as a vehicle for weakening various forces. For example, particularly focusing on unions, and suggested that unions following the election should be creating move the money caucuses and demanding meetings with their legislators to pursue a move the money agenda. So it seems like making stronger alliances with unions would be one of the possible avenues for moving this movement of move the money forward. Gerald foresees that in 2021 there will definitely be, no matter what happens, stronger pressure to move the money, in part to find the resources to to deal with the pandemic. Cautions that the Democrats win, it's not all going to be fine. Adverted to some of the hawks, it sounds like defense hawks that are, part of the Biden team. Mentioned Colin Powell, the probable defense secretary, Michelle Flournoy. So, whatever happens, even with the Biden administration, we're going to have a lot of work to do. And finally, mentioning on a positive note, the clear signs that the International Criminal Court is going to be going after the U.S. For its actions of supporting the Saudis in their war with Yemen. So, some final thoughts in addition to what I said, or correcting what I said, or however you want to do this. Vijay, do you want to start?
Okay, if that's okay. Well, look, basically, this is a very tense period in our history as people. I really do agree with a lot that Noam Chomsky has been saying recently about, he's a very wise person, and he's been talking about the great threat to the planet and so on. And he recently introduced again a subject which people have forgotten to talk about, which is, the threat of nuclear war. And the fact that there are really some insane people in Washington who have once more seriously put on the table battlefield nukes and, things that I had thought had been at least forgotten. Why do you need battlefield nukes when you have such immense conventional advantage? I mean, the problem the United States has isn't that it can't obliterate countries. The problem is nobody wants you to win the war. And I think that was the lesson in Iraq. The US flattened neighborhoods in Fallujah, but the Iraqis didn't want the US to win the war. And I think that's the lesson. It's not that you don't have enough weapons. It's you don't have any reason to be there, and they don't want you there. So that's the lesson to take, not let's now use battlefield intermediate nukes and so on. Even the way in which the transition to green is going is got militaristic implications. And I want to just say this, even though I know that it doesn't sound great, because we just said, let's open the doors to a wider movement. Look, frankly, the Green New Deal to me is a very troubling development. It's not a positive thing, because it's not thinking about the fact that a lot of the green technologies are extremely dirty for the third world. For instance, you're going to need batteries if you're going to go to solar or wind. Batteries means you're going to use lithium, you're going to use cobalt. That means the Congo is going to see immense pressure, increased pressure, a place where now roughly, at least a third of the population is struggling with hunger. That's the main source of cobalt for the world. Lithium, I mean, we just in November saw a coup d'etat against the government of Evo Morales and Alvaro Garcia Linera and their Mas party. That coup was motivated, well, when I first said this, the day of the coup, I said, this is a coup for lithium. I was roundly attacked, people saying you're a conspiracy theorist, this is to do with democracy and whatever. Okay, fine, I don't mind. You want to believe that it's about democracy? Well, it turns out there was no infringement of democracy in the election of 2019, as shown in a number of studies. And well, it was about lithium and indium, which is what's used in the screen in front of me. The green transition has to think about the price paid by miners in the Congo, in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The Green New Deal has to think about the coup d'etats that are going to come in order to get these rare earth minerals and so on. It's not so clean, this clean energy. And I don't see enough of a discussion happening, because I think this clean energy is also going to be about garrisoning parts of the planet in order to siphon rare earth minerals to US and European companies and cut off other places of the world from those minerals. This is not a peaceful transition. Let's not believe in the advertisements placed by the oil companies in the magazines. In The Economist, big oil has they'll take a huge page ad and have a flower in a field and say, we are committed to the green transition. Seriously, be careful what we fall into. And I'm afraid we're not getting into this whole Green New Deal thing with enough critical consciousness about the militaristic implications of the transition.
Can I just ask, we do need a Green New Deal. We need a green transition. Are there better frameworks that do take into account the consequences for the third world?
Yes, absolutely. The first thing is, I would like to see a major cut in energy consumption in Europe and the United States, and that includes the military, which is an enormous utilizer of energy. As you just said previously, Mariam, there needs to be a cut. That's one. Secondly, there's no barrier to extracting cobalt from copper remains in the tailing mines of Congo. But I would like to see the Congolese paid a fair and just price. I would like to see workers in the mines, in the tailing mines, they're paid a just and fair price. I would like to see equipment that keeps people from getting sick who work there. I would like to see, Canadian mining companies pay a fair price to South American countries and not try to overthrow them. I'm not saying don't use lithium and don't use cobalt, but for God's sake, don't use lithium and cobalt if you're going to continue a structure that relies on child labor in the Congo and that relies on overthrowing governments in Latin America. Pay the price for what you use, is what I'm saying, Mariam. Pay the price for what you use. Don't externalize the cost onto other people. With coal, we externalize the price to the atmosphere. With this green technology, there's a temptation to allow really quite objectionable people like Elon Musk to create a structure that externalizes the cost of the green transition to people in the center of Africa and the DRC, and as I said, in South America.
Thanks. I see one more question here, which was, what was the site mentioned in the beginning with the various expenditures ranked by nations? That was the Social Progress Index. If you Google that, you'll find it. Gerald, what are your final thoughts?
Well, nothing elaborate, just to reiterate the points that have already been made about the importance of the Move the Money movement, the importance of organizing around this fundamental concept, the importance of organizing in our student unions and our trade unions and our block associations and our tenant associations, et cetera. That's it. Great.
That is a good summation in my view. So let's go out and do that, I guess. If there are no further thoughts, I want to thank both of you for participating, and for the Connecticut Peace and Solidarity Coalition for organizing this on International Peace Day of all days. And I just add, let's do everything we possibly can in the next 43 days to save our democracy, and such as it is, and to save our planet. So thank you so much, and I guess we'll leave it there. Thank you so much.
Bye, Gerald. Bye, Mariam.
Bye.
Hi, Al. Hi, Al. I can see Al Marder there. Bye.